For 8 years, every specialist in the country told General Morgan Dave the same thing. His daughter's blindness was permanent. Irreversible. Done. He spent millions, called in every favor, moved heaven and military earth, and nothing changed. Then a probationary nurse with a ruined reputation walked into Regina's room, spent 11 minutes with her, and saw what 15 doctors in 8 years had missed. What happened next didn't just restore a young woman's sight. It destroyed everything her father believed and started a love story nobody saw coming. Good day and welcome to this channel. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, as we need to know how far our stories travel. Now let's begin.
They have missed all this for years. I must inform the general. I must inform the general. Yes, I can see some lights. It burns.
I'm lost for words. Thank goodness my daughter can see now.
Thanks for everything. Dad, are you there?
7 steps from the bed to the dresser. 12 steps from the dresser to the door. Regina Dave knew every inch of her room, not by sight, but by memory, by touch, by the kind of repetition that turns a prison into something almost comfortable. She moved through the darkness the way she'd moved through it for 8 years now, fingers trailing the wall, each step deliberate, each breath steady. At 22 years old, Regina had mastered the art of living blind. But mastering something and accepting it? Those are two very different things. She settled on the edge of her bed and reached for the nightstand. Her fingers found the picture frame, the same one she reached for almost every morning. She couldn't see it anymore. Hadn't been able to for years. But she knew what it held. A photo of herself at 13. Bright eyes. A wide smile. A girl who used to sketch buildings in her notebook and dream about designing skyscrapers. That girl felt like a stranger now. Regina's thumb traced the edge of the glass and she whispered to no one, "I don't even remember what I looked like." Regina, her father's voice boomed from the bottom of the stairs. General Morgan Dave, decorated Navy veteran, 3-star general, a man who had commanded warships and led thousands. But upstairs, behind that closed bedroom door, was the one battle he couldn't win. She didn't answer right away. She already knew what he was going to say. He appeared in her doorway moments later. Tall, broad-shouldered, still carrying himself like the world owed him a salute. But his voice softened the way it only did for her. "I got a call from Bethesda. There's a new team. Different approach. They want to see you next week." Regina let out a slow breath. "How many more, Dad?" "As many as it takes." She didn't argue. She'd stopped arguing a long time ago. But her fingers tightened around that picture frame until her knuckles ached. Have you ever felt like the world had already decided who you were, before you even got a chance to prove them wrong? Drop a comment below and tell me. I think this story is going to hit different. Now, 20 minutes across town, a navy blue sedan pulled into the parking lot of the Whitmore Military Medical Center. Angela Bennett killed the engine but didn't move. She just sat there, staring through the windshield at the building like it was a firing line. On the passenger seat beside her sat a single folded letter. A disciplinary notice. Final probation. One more incident. One more crossed line, and her nursing career was over before it ever really started. Angela closed her eyes, and for a moment she wasn't in that parking lot anymore. She was back in Helmand Province. Sand in her teeth, blood on her hands. A 19-year-old Marine on a stretcher, seizing, and Angela screaming for a doctor who never came fast enough. She opened her eyes, pressed her palms against the steering wheel, breathed. That was then. This is now. Inside the facility, her supervisor, a thin, humorless woman named Dr. Pratt, barely looked up from her clipboard. "You're assigned to long-term patient care. Low acuity, routine vitals, daily check-ins. Nothing complicated." She slid a file across the desk. It was thick, years of records, imaging reports, specialist notes. Angela picked it up and read the name on the tab. Regina Dave. She flipped it open. On nearly every page, stamped in faded red ink, was the same word. Irreversible. Dr. Pratt leaned back. The father is General Morgan Dave. Navy. Very involved. Very particular. She paused and looked at Angela over her glasses. "Don't make waves." Angela nodded, jaw tight. She tucked the file under her arm, walked down the long corridor, and stopped in front of room 114. She could hear soft movement inside, a careful shuffle of feet. Someone navigating a world built for people who could see. Angela placed her hand on the door handle. She didn't know it yet, neither of them did, but everything was about to change.
Good morning, beautiful. I am the new nurse.
The door opened slowly, and Angela stepped inside. Regina was sitting upright in a chair near the window, back straight, hands folded in her lap, chin tilted slightly upward the way people do when they've learned to face a world they can't see. She didn't flinch, didn't turn. She simply said, "New nurse?" Angela paused. Most patients at least waited for an introduction. That obvious? Different footsteps, Regina said calmly. Different perfume. The last one wore vanilla. You smell like hand sanitizer and coffee. Angela almost smiled. Guilty. I'm Angela. Angela Bennett. I'll be handling your daily check-ins for a while. For a while, Regina repeated. That's what they all say. There it was, polite but distant. A wall built from years of strangers cycling through her life, each one leaving the same way they came. Regina had stopped learning names a long time ago. Angela set her bag down, pulled on gloves, and began the routine. Blood pressure, pulse, oxygen levels, everything textbook, everything normal. Then she reached for her penlight. I'm going to check your pupil response, Angela said. Just a quick look. Regina didn't react. She'd done this 1,000 times. Angela leaned in, clicked the light on, and passed it slowly across Regina's left eye. Then the right, and then, she stopped. She did it again. Left eye, right eye, slow, steady, deliberate. Regina's pupils constricted, not a lot, but enough. And when Angela moved her open hand quickly past the right side of Regina's face, close, sudden, Regina flinched. Her head turned, just slightly, just barely, but it happened. Angela pulled back. She looked down at the file in her lap, flipped to the neurological summary. The words were right there in black and white, complete bilateral vision loss. Irreversible, no residual visual function detected. But what she'd just seen didn't match. Angela's voice was careful now. Quiet. Regina. When I moved my hand just now, did you sense anything? Regina was still for a moment. Then she swallowed. Sometimes, she said, barely above a whisper. I think I see shadows. Like movement, shapes that aren't really there. She paused. But the doctors told me it's just my brain playing tricks. Phantom signals. They said it doesn't mean anything. Angela didn't respond right away. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilation humming through the ceiling. Then she said, almost to herself, almost like she didn't mean to say it out loud, or maybe it's your brain trying to tell them something they stopped listening for. Regina turned toward her voice. What do you mean? But Angela didn't answer. Not yet. She closed the file gently, told Regina she'd be back later, and walked out of that room with her heart pounding against her ribs. That night, Angela spread Regina's records across her kitchen table. 8 years of scans, reports, and specialist opinions stacked like a wall of certainty. Every doctor had looked at the same damaged region of Regina's brain and agreed. Case closed. Irreversible. But Angela wasn't looking at what was damaged. She was looking at what was next to it. And there it was, buried under years of assumptions. Adjacent neural pathways, visual connectors that sat right beside the injured area. Every scan had focused on the destruction and never once evaluated what had survived. No one had ordered the right follow-up imaging because the first diagnosis had been so absolute, so confident, that every specialist after simply agreed. 15 doctors in 8 years, and not one of them had thought to look a little to the left. Angela sat back in her chair. Her hands were shaking. She stared at the scans under the yellow light of her kitchen lamp, and she said out loud to an empty apartment. They missed it. They all missed it. Angela barely slept that night. By 7 the next morning, she was standing outside the office of Dr. Leonard Cross, senior neurologist, 23 years of practice, and the man who had personally signed off on Regina's diagnosis 4 years ago. She knocked twice and walked in before he could say, "Come in." Dr. Cross looked up from his desk with the kind of expression reserved for people who had already wasted his time before they opened their mouth. Angela placed her notes in front of him, Her own observations, the pupil responses, the flinch reactions, and a highlighted section of Regina's original imaging that showed the adjacent visual pathways no one had followed up on. I think there's residual visual function, Angela said. The original scans focused entirely on the primary damage site, but these surrounding pathways were never properly evaluated. If we ordered new targeted imaging. Stop. Dr. Cross didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Nurse Bennett, this case has been reviewed by some of the finest neurological specialists in this country. Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, military neurology at Walter Reed. Are you telling me that all of them, every single one, missed something that you caught during a routine vitals check? Angela held his gaze. I'm telling you that what I observed doesn't match what's in that file. Doctor. Cross picked up her notes, glanced at them for maybe 3 seconds, and set them back down. You're here to take vitals, Nurse Bennett, not to rewrite diagnoses. You're on final probation. I'd suggest you remember that. Angela opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off. One more disruption, and I will personally recommend your termination. Are we clear? Angela stood there for a long moment. Then she picked up her notes, turned around, and walked out without a word. But she didn't throw them away. Now, word travels fast in a military medical facility. By that afternoon, General Morgan Dave had received a phone call informing him that a probationary nurse, a former Marine with a disciplinary record, was questioning 8 years of expert medical consensus on his daughter's condition. He was at the facility within the hour. Morgan Dave didn't storm in. He didn't need to. The man walked through those hallways the way a thunderstorm rolls across open water, slow, dark, and impossible to ignore. Staff stepped aside, heads turned. When he found Angela in the corridor outside Regina's room, he stopped 3 feet in front of her and looked down at her like she was a private who'd forgotten her rank. You're the nurse. It wasn't a question. Angela straightened. Yes, sir. Angela Bennett. I've had 15 specialists examine my daughter, Nurse Bennett. 15. From the most respected institutions in this country. Men and women who have spent decades. With respect, General, Angela said, and she didn't look away, not even for a second. 15 specialists looked at the same old scans and agreed with each other. That's not 15 opinions. That's one opinion, repeated 15 times. The hallway went dead silent. Morgan's jaw tightened. You could see the vein at his temple pulse. This was not a man who was accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone the system had already flagged as a problem. He stepped closer. His voice dropped low. You have no idea what my family has been through. You don't know the nights. You don't know the surgeries. You don't know what hope does to a father when it's ripped away over and over again. He paused. I want her reassigned. Today. He turned and walked toward administration without waiting for Angela's response. Angela stood alone in that hallway, her hands trembling at her sides, not from fear, but from the effort of holding everything inside. She looked down at the file still tucked under her arm. 8 years of the word irreversible. An entire system telling her to sit down and be quiet. But sitting down had never saved anyone. She knew that better than most. And behind the closed door of room 114, Regina sat perfectly still on the edge of her bed. She hadn't heard every word, but she'd heard enough. She'd heard Angela's voice, steady and unwavering. She'd heard her father's anger. And she'd heard that single line that now echoed in the silence of her dark world. That's not 15 opinions. That's one opinion, repeated 15 times. Regina pressed her palms against her knees. Her chest was tight. Part of her was furious. Furious that someone new had walked into her life and was shaking the ground beneath her feet. She had made peace with the dark. She had learned to live without sight, without hope, without the cruel cycle of maybe this time followed by not this time either. And now this nurse, this woman she'd met once, was trying to crack open a door that Regina had spent years nailing shut. But there was another part of her. A quieter part. A part that whispered from somewhere deep inside her chest. What if she's right? And that terrified Regina more than the darkness ever had. Because darkness, she could survive. But hoping again? That might actually destroy her. General Morgan Dave wanted Angela Bennett gone. He made that very clear. But the universe, or maybe just hospital bureaucracy, had other plans. The administrator at Whitmore Medical Center looked across her desk at Morgan with the kind of apologetic firmness that only government employees can pull off. "General Dave, I understand your concerns. But we're currently understaffed in long-term patient care. Nurse Bennett is the only available provider for your daughter's unit for at least the next 2 weeks. A reassignment request has been filed, but until it's processed." 2 weeks, Morgan repeated. 2 weeks. At minimum. Morgan's jaw clenched so tight you could almost hear his teeth crack. But he was a military man. He understood systems. So he did what any general would do when he couldn't remove a threat: he positioned himself to monitor it. From that day forward, Morgan was present for every single one of Angela's visits. Every vitals check, every routine interaction. He sat in the corner of room 114 like a stone wall with folded arms, watching Angela's every move, every word, every glance at his daughter. The first few days were suffocating. Angela would walk in, greet Regina, check her vitals, and the whole time Morgan sat there radiating tension so thick it practically changed the air pressure in the room. Regina barely spoke. Angela kept things clinical. The silence between them was heavy enough to bruise. But then, slowly, quietly, something shifted. It started on a Tuesday. Angela was adjusting the blood pressure cuff on Regina's arm when she asked a question no medical professional had ever thought to ask. "What did you want to be before all of this?" Regina tilted her head slightly. "What? Before the accident? Before the diagnosis? When you were a kid and someone asked what you wanted to be when you grew up, what did you say?" Regina was quiet for a moment. It had been so long since anyone had asked her about something other than her eyes that the question almost didn't register. Then, softly, "An architect. I used to draw buildings. All the time. I had notebooks full of them. Towers, bridges, houses with big windows." She paused. "I liked the idea of building something that would still be standing long after I was gone." Angela didn't rush to respond. She let that answer sit in the room the way it deserved to, with weight. Then she said, simply, "You still could. You know that, right?" Regina turned toward Angela's voice. Something flickered across her face, not hope exactly, but the ghost of it. The memory of what hope used to feel like. "Nobody's ever said that to me before. Then nobody's been paying attention." In the corner of the room, Morgan uncrossed his arms. He didn't say anything, but something behind his eyes moved, something he wasn't ready to name. Because in that moment, watching his daughter's face soften, watching the faintest smile cross her lips. A real smile, not the polite one she wore for doctors, he realized something that cut him straight to the bone. He couldn't remember the last time Regina had smiled like that. Not for him, not for any of the 15 specialists, not for anyone. And here was this nurse, this woman he'd tried to have removed, reaching a part of his daughter that he hadn't touched in years. He said nothing, but his hands, resting on his knees, slowly unclenched. As the days went on, Angela settled into a rhythm. She'd check Regina's vitals, and then she'd talk. Not about diagnoses, not about treatment plans, about life. She asked about Regina's favorite buildings, about what kind of music she listened to, about what sounds she loved and what textures made her feel calm. She treated Regina like a whole person, not a condition with a name and a file number. And while they talked, Angela watched. She watched the way Regina's eyes responded when she moved a clipboard from one side to the other. She noticed how Regina turned toward natural light from the window, consistently, instinctively. She tracked how Regina's blink rate changed when a shadow passed across her face. Angela never announced what she was doing. She never pulled out a penlight or made it feel like a test. She simply wove her observations into their conversations like thread through fabric, invisible unless you knew where to look. And every night, back in her apartment, she added to her notes. Dates, times, responses, patterns, a growing body of evidence that no one had asked for and no one wanted to see. But Angela saw it, and she wasn't going to unsee it, not for a supervisor, not for a neurologist, and not for a 3-star general who thought love meant control. Because something else was happening in that room, something Angela hadn't planned for. Every time Regina laughed at one of her jokes, every time Regina leaned slightly toward her voice, every time Regina whispered, "Tell me more," Angela felt the walls around her own chest begin to loosen. She wasn't just fighting for a patient anymore. She was starting to care about a person. And that, for a woman who had taught herself never to get attached after what happened in Afghanistan, was the most terrifying thing of all. It was a Thursday evening. The facility had gone quiet, that particular kind of hospital quiet where the fluorescent lights seem louder than the people. Angela was finishing her last check of the day, noting Regina's vitals on her tablet, when Regina's voice broke the silence. Angela, yeah? Why do you push so hard? Angela's fingers stopped moving on the screen. She didn't look up. It's my job. No, Regina said, and her voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who had spent 8 years listening to people more carefully than most people ever watch. It's not your job. Your job is to take my blood pressure and smile and leave. That's what every other nurse does. But you argue with doctors. You go toe to toe with my father. You sit in your apartment at night going through my scans. Don't think I don't know. She paused. So I'm asking you, why? Angela set the tablet down. She sat in the chair next to Regina's bed. And for a long time, she didn't speak. The silence stretched so far it almost became an answer in itself. Then she said, his name was Corporal Ethan Price. Regina didn't move. He was 19, stationed at a forward operating base in Helmand Province. I was the field medic on rotation. Angela's voice was steady, but if you listened close enough, you could hear it balancing on a wire. He started getting headaches. Bad ones. Said the light was bothering him. Couldn't sleep. I ran my checks and something didn't sit right with me. His pupils were sluggish. His coordination was off. I told the commanding medical officer I wanted to call for an evac and get him to a hospital for imaging. She stopped, swallowed. The officer said no, said it was stress, dehydration, that half the unit had the same symptoms and I was overreacting. Her voice dropped. He told me to give Ethan ibuprofen and let him rest. Regina's hand moved slightly on the bed, not reaching, but open. Listening with her whole body. 48 hours later, Ethan collapsed during a patrol. Brain hemorrhage, undetected swelling that had been building for days. Angela paused. He died before the helicopter landed. The room was impossibly still. The investigation cleared me. Officially, the fault was with the officer who overruled my recommendation. But I knew, something was wrong, and I let someone else's certainty silence me. Angela's breath shook once, just once. I swore after that day, I would never let someone's authority stop me from seeing what was right in front of me. Not ever again. She wiped her eyes quickly, almost roughly, the way someone does when they're not used to letting people see them cry. So when I looked at your file, and then I looked at you, and those two things didn't match, I couldn't walk away. I won't walk away, not this time. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with trust, with understanding, with the kind of honesty that strips two people down to who they really are. And then Regina spoke. You want to know something I've never told anyone? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I feel like a burden. Every single day. Angela looked at her. My dad. He's spent 8 years dragging me to specialists. 8 years fighting for a cure. And I know, he does it because he loves me. But, Regina's chin trembled. Sometimes it feels like he's not fighting for me. He's fighting for the version of me he lost. The one who could see. The one who drew buildings and ran down the stairs and looked him in the eye. Her voice cracked. He loves the daughter he lost more than the one who's here. Angela reached out and took Regina's hand. She didn't say, that's not true. She didn't say, I'm sure he loves you. She just held her hand and let the truth sit between them, raw and aching and finally spoken out loud. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can say isn't a battle cry. It's just the quiet, honest thing you've been swallowing for years. Angela stood alone against doctors, a general, and an entire system that told her she was wrong, just to fight for someone she believed in. If you can't stand bullies, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is far from over. Now, across town, in a house that was too big and too quiet for one man, General Morgan Dave sat alone at his kitchen table. The house was immaculate. Everything in its place. Shoes by the door, medals on the shelf, A life organized with military precision because if he couldn't control what happened to his daughter, he could at least control the space around him. But tonight, something had pulled him to the closet at the end of the hallway. The one he never opened. Inside were boxes. Regina's things. Her childhood. He pulled one out and opened it slowly, like it might hurt him, and it did. Sketchbooks. Dozens of them. Pages filled with buildings. Impossible, beautiful buildings drawn by a 12-year-old girl who believed she could design the whole world. Towers that touched the clouds. Bridges that stretched across oceans. Houses with massive windows that let in more light than any room could hold. Morgan picked up one drawing and held it under the kitchen light. His hands were shaking. The paper trembled between his fingers. It was a house, a simple one, and at the bottom, in a child's handwriting, it said, "For me and Daddy." Morgan set the drawing down, pressed both palms flat against the table, and closed his eyes. He had spent 8 years trying to fix his daughter. 8 years chasing specialists and treatments and experimental procedures, because that was the only language he knew. Action, strategy, solutions. He was a general. Generals don't sit with pain. They attack it. But sitting in that kitchen, staring at a drawing his little girl made before the world went dark, Morgan finally understood something he'd been running from all along. He didn't know how to love what remained because he'd never stopped grieving what was lost. And in all his fighting, in all his fixing, he had never once sat beside his daughter and simply said, "You are enough. Right now, exactly as you are." His eyes burned. A single tear hit the surface of the drawing, smudging the crayon just slightly. The general, the man who had commanded warships and never flinched under fire, sat alone in his kitchen and wept. It was against protocol. Angela knew that. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat, instinctively, completely, and with the full understanding that she was going to do it anyway. It was a Friday evening. The facility was running on a skeleton crew. The hallways were dim and quiet. Angela walked into room 114 with a wheelchair and a look on her face that Regina couldn't see but could somehow feel. "Get up," Angela said. Regina frowned. "It's 8 o'clock. My vitals are done. What are you? Do you trust me?" The question hung in the air. Simple, enormous. Regina sat with it for a moment. Then she reached out her hand. "Don't make me regret it." Angela guided her into the wheelchair, draped a blanket across her lap, and rolled her down the hallway, past the nurses' station, through a side door that led to the facility's courtyard garden. A small square of green that most patients never saw because nobody ever thought to take them there. The evening air hit Regina's skin like a gift. Cool, soft, carrying the smell of jasmine and fresh-cut grass and something else. Something open, something wide, something that didn't smell like antiseptic or hospital sheets. Regina inhaled deeply and her entire body relaxed in a way Angela had never seen before. Angela parked the wheelchair beneath an old magnolia tree, sat down on the stone bench beside her, and just breathed. "Tell me what you see," Regina said quietly. Angela looked around, and she didn't describe it the way a nurse would note a patient's surroundings on a chart. She described it the way someone describes a world they're grateful to still be standing in. "The sun's going down," Angela said, "and it's not just setting, it's melting. Like someone poured gold and copper across the whole sky and it's dripping behind the trees. The clouds are turning this deep violet color at the edges. And the garden. There's a row of gardenias along the fence. White ones. They're almost glowing in the last light." She paused. "And there's a bird. I don't know what kind, sitting on the top of the magnolia. Just watching everything, like he's got the best seat in the house and he knows it." Regina smiled. Not the polite smile she gave doctors. Not the tired smile she gave her father. A real one. One that reached her eyes even though her eyes couldn't reach the world. "You don't describe things like a nurse," Regina said softly. Angela glanced at her. "No, you describe them like someone who almost lost them." Angela was quiet for a beat. "Then, maybe I did." Something shifted between them in that silence. Something warm and fragile and entirely new. Regina tilted her head. "So tell me, Nurse Bennett, when you're not terrorizing neurologists and picking fights with generals, what do you actually do for fun?" Angela laughed. A real laugh, surprised and unguarded. "Did you just call me a terrorist? I called you a terrorizer. There's a difference. One's got better intentions. Oh, so now the blind architect is a comedian. And the soldier nurse is deflecting. Answer the question. They went back and forth like that, teasing, sparring, laughing, and if you had walked past that garden in that moment, you wouldn't have seen a nurse and a patient. You would have seen two women who had spent years carrying weight they never asked for, finally setting it down, if only for a few minutes. Angela told Regina about the apartment she could barely afford, about the plant on her windowsill she kept alive out of pure spite, about how she once tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner for herself and set off the smoke alarm 3 times. Regina told Angela about the audiobooks she devoured, about how she memorized the layout of every building she'd ever been in, about how she sometimes dreamed in images, full color, full light, and waking up was the cruelest part of her day. And then the laughter faded, not because something went wrong, but because something went deeper. The stars had begun to appear. The garden was dark now except for a single pathway light casting a low amber glow across the stone. Angela looked at Regina, really looked at her. The way her chin lifted slightly when she was thinking. The way her fingers rested open in her lap like they were still waiting to hold a pencil. The way she turned toward Angela's voice like it was the only direction that mattered. Angela reached over and took Regina's hand. Regina didn't pull away. "I'm going to fight for you," Angela said. And her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't bold. It was the quietest she'd ever sounded, because the truest things don't need volume. Not because it's my job. Not because of what happened in Afghanistan. Because it's you. Because you deserve someone who won't stop looking. Regina's fingers tightened around Angela's. Her breath caught. And then she whispered, "Nobody's ever stayed before." Angela squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." And upstairs, behind a second-floor window overlooking the courtyard, General Morgan Dave stood completely still. His hands rested on the windowsill. His face was unreadable. He had come back to the facility to check on Regina. To hover. To control. That was his way. But what he saw in that garden stopped him cold. His daughter, his girl who hadn't laughed in years, who had turned inward so far he couldn't reach her, was sitting in the cool night air, holding hands with the woman he had tried to have fired. And she was smiling, not for him, not because of him, because of her. Morgan didn't storm down the stairs. He didn't call administration. He didn't intervene. He stood at that window for a long time. And then, slowly, he stepped back into the shadows and let them have their moment. Because somewhere beneath the armor, beneath the rank and the discipline and 8 years of battle plans disguised as love, Morgan Dave was still a father. And even a general knows when to stand down. It all came crashing down on a Monday morning. Angela was restocking a supply cart in the hallway when 2 members of hospital administration appeared behind her. One of them was holding a manila folder. The other wouldn't make eye contact. "Nurse Bennett, you're needed in conference room B immediately." She knew. Before they said another word, she knew. Someone had found her notes. The unofficial assessments. The visual tracking observations she'd been quietly documenting during her shifts with Regina. Pages of data that no one had authorized her to collect. Observations that no one had asked her to make. Evidence that directly challenged a diagnosis signed off on by the most senior neurologist in the building. Dr. Cross was already seated when Angela walked into the room. Beside him sat 2 members of the hospital's review board. And at the end of the table, in full dress uniform like he was attending a court-martial, sat General Morgan Dave. Angela's stomach dropped. The hearing was swift. Dr. Cross laid out the facts in a voice so cold it could have frosted glass. Nurse Bennett conducted unauthorized neurological assessments on a long-term patient outside the scope of her duties. She disregarded a direct warning from a senior physician. She documented findings without approval and continued to pursue a line of inquiry she was explicitly told to abandon. He placed Angela's handwritten notes on the table like evidence at a trial. Then they turned to Morgan. The general sat rigid in his chair. He didn't look at Angela. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, but underneath it, there was something fractured. Something that sounded less like authority and more like a man trying to hold himself together. "My daughter has been through more than most people could survive," he said. "She has been examined by the finest specialists this country has. And every time, every single time, someone offered hope, it was taken away. Do you understand what that does to a person? To a father? He paused. His jaw tightened. I have watched my daughter break. More than once. And I swore I would never let anyone put her through that again. He finally looked at Angela. And his eyes weren't angry. They were terrified. I won't let it happen again. Not from anyone. Angela opened her mouth. But what could she say? The room had already made its decision. Suspension. Effective immediately. Pending full review. A security officer escorted Angela out of the building. She walked down that long corridor with her jacket in her hands and her badge left behind on the conference table. Staff she had worked beside for weeks looked away as she passed. No one said a word. No one said goodbye. The doors closed behind her. And just like that, she was gone. Regina didn't find out from her father. She didn't find out from Angela. She found out from a stranger. A new nurse walked into room 114 that afternoon. Brisk, efficient, completely unfamiliar. Good afternoon, Ms. Dave. I'm Nurse Holloway. I'll be taking over your care moving forward. Regina sat very still. Where's Angela? Nurse Bennett is no longer assigned to this unit. What do you mean she's no longer assigned? Where is she? I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters. Now, if I could just check your... Where is Angela? The silence that followed told Regina everything the nurse wouldn't say. She waited until her father came that evening. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, that heavy, deliberate stride she'd memorized since childhood. He walked in and sat down in his usual chair. He said, "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" And Regina erupted. "What did you do?" Morgan went quiet. "Regina, don't. I heard what happened. They took her. They removed her. And you sat in that room and helped them do it. I was protecting you. You didn't protect me, Dad." Her voice broke wide open, 8 years of silence cracking like glass. "You silenced the only person who actually listened to me. The only person who talked to me like I was a human being and not a diagnosis on a chart." Morgan stood up. "Regina, I was trying to keep you from getting hurt. I'm already hurt." She was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "I've been hurt for 8 years. Every day I wake up in the dark and I get poked and tested and shuffled around like some project you're trying to fix. And the only thing that stopped hurting was her." That last word hit Morgan like a bullet. Was her. Not a treatment, not a specialist, not a facility. Her. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in his life, General Morgan Dave had no orders to give, no strategy to deploy, no battle plan to fall back on. He stood in front of his daughter and had absolutely nothing. Regina's voice dropped to a whisper. "You didn't protect me, Dad. You just made sure I have nothing left." She turned away from him, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and went silent in a way that was worse than screaming. Morgan stood there for a long moment. Then he walked out of the room without a word. And across town, in a small apartment with bare walls and a single plant on the windowsill, Angela Bennett sat on the floor with her back against the door. Her phone was in her hand. The screen glowed in the dark. Regina's number was right there, the one she'd saved during the first week, in case of emergencies. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She wanted to call. God, she wanted to call. She wanted to tell Regina that she wasn't giving up. That the notes were real. That what she'd seen was real. That what she felt was real. But what could she offer now? She was suspended, disgraced, a nurse with no hospital, no badge, and no standing. Calling would only give Regina more hope to lose. And Angela had already learned what false hope costs. She set the phone face down on the floor, drew her knees to her chest, and stared at the wall in silence. Two women, miles apart, both sitting in the dark. One had lived in it for 8 years. The other was learning what it felt like for the first time. Morgan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office surrounded by commendations and medals, replaying his daughter's words until they burned through every wall he'd ever built. The only thing that stopped hurting was her. His eyes drifted to the manila folder on his desk, Angela's notes from the hearing. He'd tossed them there without reading them. He already knew what he thought. But tonight, something made him open it. And what he found wasn't the reckless scribbling of a nurse playing doctor. It was meticulous, precise. Dates, times, Pupil reactions documented to the millimeter. Tracking behaviors catalogued across sessions. Light sensitivity mapped against time of day. It read like a field report, because that's exactly what it was. Morgan pulled out Regina's old scans and laid them beside Angela's observations. For the first time, he didn't look through the lens of what 15 specialists had told him. He looked the way he'd study a battlefield map, searching for what had been missed. The adjacent pathways, right there, unevaluated, dismissed because of their proximity to the damage rather than assessed on their own. His chest went tight. He called Dr. Raymond Keyes, an old friend, a neuro-ophthalmologist at Johns Hopkins. Didn't mention names, just read the observations and describe the imaging. Raymond was quiet for a long time. Then, whoever documented this has a sharp eye. Those pathways should have been followed up years ago. I'd absolutely want new imaging. There could be surviving function no one assessed. Morgan closed his eyes. On one side of his desk sat Angela's notes. On the other, Regina's childhood drawing, the little house with big windows and crayon words, "For me and Daddy." Both telling him the same thing. You were wrong, and it's not too late. He dialed Angela's number. Across town, Angela stood surrounded by half-packed boxes. A suitcase on the bed. A job listing in Portland glowing on her laptop. A clean escape. Her phone buzzed. Military area code. She almost didn't answer. "This is General Dave." Silence stretched between them. "I think I owe you a conversation," Morgan said. His voice sounded stripped, like a man who'd finally removed his armor. Angela looked at the boxes around her. She had every reason to hang up. But this was never about Morgan. It was about a woman in room 114 who deserved more than darkness. "Your daughter deserves more than a conversation, General. I know. That's why I'm calling." Angela closed her eyes. "Then I'm not coming back to be polite. I'm coming back to finish what I started. I'd expect nothing less." She hung up, looked at the suitcase, closed it, slid it into the closet. Portland could wait, and in room 114, Regina reached for the photo frame she held every morning, the girl she used to be. But this time, she didn't whisper about the past. She whispered a name, Angela. Then she set the frame down, and didn't pick it up again. She was done looking backward. General Morgan Dave had spent 8 years using his influence to fight for his daughter. For the first time, he used it to fight for someone else. He called the hospital board personally, not as a concerned father, as a 3-star general correcting a grave mistake. He demanded fresh testing with an independent specialist. He demanded Angela Bennett be reinstated. The board agreed within 48 hours. Angela walked back into Whitmore on a Tuesday morning. Morgan was waiting outside room 114. He didn't salute, didn't shake her hand. He simply said, "Get my daughter back." New targeted imaging confirmed everything. Surviving visual pathways, intact, functional, dormant but alive. Angela had been right. 8 years, 15 specialists, and a probationary nurse with a penlight saw what none of them did. Rehabilitation began immediately. Angela designed the protocol: light therapy, visual tracking, gradual exposure to contrast and color. Every day she was there, guiding, pushing, holding Regina's hand when frustration brought tears. Morgan was there too, but different. No commands, no hovering. One afternoon he arrived carrying a worn sketchbook with a cracked spine. He placed it in Regina's lap. "I kept everything, every drawing." Regina's fingers moved across the cover. She recognized it instantly. She pressed it against her chest and cried. Morgan knelt beside her and held her, not like a general, just like a father finally learning to stay instead of fix. Angela became family. Dinners together, laughter, arguments about football, chess matches Regina always won. 3 broken people stitching themselves together slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. Then the day arrived. After a critical procedure, Regina's eyes were bandaged for 72 hours. On the 3rd morning, Dr. Keyes removed them in a dim room. "Take your time. Don't force anything." Regina blinked. Light flooded in. Blurry shapes. Then edges. Then color bleeding into focus like watercolors filling an empty canvas. She turned her head, and there, 2 feet away, trembling, trying to stay professional and failing completely, was Angela. tears streaming down her face. Regina reached up and touched Angela's cheek, traced the line of her jaw, the dampness beneath her eyes. "You're more beautiful than I imagined," Regina whispered. Angela laughed through a sob. "You're the architect. You tell me if I'm structurally sound. You're the strongest thing I've ever seen." In the doorway, Morgan's eyes were red. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of them. The three of them stayed like that, tangled together, crying, whole. That evening, Regina sat by the window with her old sketchbook and a pencil. She drew a building, tall, with big windows. And next to it, she drew a woman. Angela looked over her shoulder. "Is that me?" Regina smiled. "That's home. Sometimes the people who change our lives aren't the ones with the titles or the degrees. They're the ones who simply refused to look away." If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave a comment. Who's the person in your life who truly saw you when no one else did?